Hi, Misha here, and we have talked about this gun several times. The Springfield Hellion Bullpup, the U.S. semi-automatic ATF-approved version of the Croatian HS Produkts VHS-2, their current military rifle. And folks ask me, what do I think about the new version? Last year, in January, this was the version released with the 16-inch carbine barrel. Essentially, this is analogous to the VHS-2. This year, 2023, this version was released, the Hellion with a 20-inch barrel. For what it's worth, they also released an intermediate 18-inch. This is analogous to the Croatian military's VHS-2, full-length rifle, as it were. So yeah, people asked what we think, and so we're going to share. And I'm going to be completely upfront with you. This gun has been surprising to us as civilian shooters, hobbyists, historians, and also on the world stage. Who would have thought that Croatia, of all nations, would not only design and develop its own gun, but its own bullpup, which is a pretty elite thing. Not many countries, not many companies make a bullpup. And frankly, just how successful it's been. And frankly, just how good of a gun the semi-automatic Hellion has been for us too. And I'm torn. The only difference really is the barrel, 20-inch versus 16. Otherwise, the same gun. So I can't justify keeping both. My 16-incher has been such a good shooter, 100% reliable. But you know me, I like the military look. Should I swap the 16 for the 20? Or stick with what I know? And both are very much in widespread Croatian military service. And believe it or not, it seems like they're actually fielding more Ks than Ds. But they've been purchasing both since the beginning. Anyway, we're going to revisit, talk about these, the differences, the influences, and just, share our nearly 2 years experience by this point of firing the Hellion. And as always, if you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. Also, you could help us a lot if you check out our Patreon or participate in our live streams. With that, let's just get into it. We'll try it out with a few different types of ammo, a couple of different types of mags. Just see how it does at the range. First, I want to begin by saying that we've continued to have very good luck out of the 16-inch carbine version. And we, at least as of recording this video section right here, have not fired the 20. But I'm not really thinking it would be much difference because everything is the same. The gas system's the same length, the receiver chassis, the stock. Truly the only difference is in the barrel. This one, including the removable muzzle device, flash hider, measures right under 28 inches with the adjustable stock all the way in. This is 5 positions and has about 2 inches of adjustment, bringing, when it's all the way out, the overall length to just right at 30 inches. And this thing weighs roughly 8 pounds kitted up. Not light, not heavy. Bullpups are known for being compact, not light. standard metal rail with actually quite good kind of diopter-ish iron sights. So that's this gun. This version, whose barrel is actually just a hair under 20 inches, this one's just a hair over 16, has an overall length of about 31.5 inches with its adjustable stock all the way in. This one's new, so it doesn't actually spring out on its own. There it goes. And when it's fully out, you're looking at just over 33.5 inches. Again, the difference is because this is about a 19.7, 19.8 inch barrel, and this is about a 16.1, 16.2. So that's where the half inch of discrepancy comes from. Everything else is the same on the sights, and the overall weight is really not much more, only about 3-4 ounces effectively more weight. Part of it is because there is some fluting here, and yeah, it doesn't really just matter that much. So very, very similar.
This gun looks awesome. I mean, the whole design of it, I really came around to the Bullpup.
Let me begin by setting the stage and really trying to explain why the VHS-2, the Hellion, interests me. After all, several other companies, Desert Tech and Kel-Tech and many others in America, even Bushmaster years ago with the M17, have made bullpups, especially in 5.56, 223. So why does this catch my attention? Well, it's because of guns like this. History. I like guns with interesting histories behind them, and those tend to be military guns. Not always, but often. Sometimes they're police guns, sometimes they're just very famous civilian guns, but typically, yeah, military. And I also like guns that are both mechanically robust, low maintenance, easy to work on in the field, and also mechanically interesting. You know, after a while, you kind of get tired of the same old, same old. And so we go all the way back to the final days of Yugoslavia. In 1992, the nation was breaking apart, and new nations such as Serbia and Croatia were coming out of the wreckage. And they would each inherit various Zastava products. Of course, Serbia would end up with a Zastava factory. Croatia would not directly have AK production, but they would inherit nearly 90,000 M70s like this. Of course, this is a OPAP semi-auto, but it's based on an M70B1, 760x39. These were used during the tragic Yugoslavian civil wars, and really was the first gun of the nascent Croatian armed forces, Croatian army. They wanted a firearms development and manufacturing firm. And from the very beginning, a company at the time known as IM Metal stepped up. And they would very soon deliver a pistol known as the PHP, followed by the HS-95. And when it came to rifles, their very first efforts, between 92 and 96 especially, were Bullpup Kalashnikovs. Have you ever handled an AK turned into a Bullpup? If you have, I probably don't need to explain why it didn't work out. It was a flawed design. So they would turn their attention to other guns, and as the civil wars would end, Croatia would buy small batches for testing of various guns from all around Europe and North America, and even several hundred of some types of guns for their police, border guards, so on and so forth. But they still had tens of thousands of these M70s. They were in frontline use, reserves, whatnot, but they really wanted to replace them. They wanted to move away from this cartridge, this caliber, and they wanted to go to something in 5.56. So IM Metal did their best to oblige. While IM Metal was looking at various systems used, the government would purchase several guns, either in small batches for evaluation or in a couple of hundred batches for arming specific groups, including the new, at the time, there was a time when the M4 was new, from Colt. Before that, the 20-inch M16A2 was king. Now, they wouldn't pick up too many of these, and I'm not sure if they picked up other brands besides Colt. They might have done. But it gave them exposure to the 5.56 cartridge, the AR-15 magazine, and kind of showed them the conventional layout. After all, a gun like this, with a 14.5-inch barrel and a non-folding, although still adjustable stock, it's a lot lighter, but it's not much more compact than an AK, frankly. They're learning, though. And so next, they looked into bullpups. In fact, they really showed a strong interest for the French FAMAS bullpup. And do I have one to show you? Come on, if I had a FAMAS, you'd have seen it already. No, I don't. They were one of the hardest to get, most expensive semi-autos in America today. And I'm not even sure if Croatia actually purchased any FAMASs for issue, or if they were just being inspired by them. But they did actually purchase a few F2000s from FN. These were released 2001. So in this really early period, they would pick up a few for testing and evaluation, along with the FAMASs. And this was showing kind of the look at Bullpup. And the nice thing about a Bullpup, again, they're not really meant to be lightweight, but they are compact, and some of them can be easily handled with one hand, one arm, leaving the other one free. And they're good for getting in and out of vehicles, and they're good for, CQB, tight streets, house clearing, that kind of thing, urban warfare. And while a lot of bullpups have short barrels, the nice thing is you can actually have a longer 18 or even 20-inch barrel in one, and because of the action being located all the way back here, the overall length is similar to an M4 carbine, which has, a 14.5-inch barrel. So there are benefits to bullpups. Of course, there are detractions, and they saw that with the FAMAS and the F2000, and I'm sure they had some Steyr AUGs too. But these would lead to the next prototypes from IM Metal, who would soon change their name to HS Produkts. Let's try the Hellion single-handed.
What you think?
It's like a big pistol that way. Kind of makes the extendable stock a little more understandable to grab it.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I liked about it the first time I picked it up was I like where the pistol grip is located up front. Yeah. It's just really ergonomically comfortable that way.
They would make some concepts, even prototypes, around 1999, 2003, 2004, that would be direct impingement or internal piston if you prefer, Chris, like the AR. They even had an interesting one that used gas as kind of a cushion to reduce felt recoil. But most importantly, they tried out the levered delay blowback system used in the French FAMAS. Yeah, the French FAMAS doesn't have a traditional gas system. It's, in principle, kind of like the SETME or HK G3, where it's a mechanical resistance delay system to keep the breech closed. It doesn't use rollers, it uses, well, a lever, but it's an interesting system. Unfortunately, the FAMAS really needs steel case ammo, not brass, to work. And Yugoslavia had been using brass case for most of its time, and that would carry on to Croatia. But the FAMAS would definitely inspire IM Metal HS Produkts. And so some of their earliest Bullpup prototypes from 2003, 2004 would look very similar to a FAMAS and internally be very similar as well, which explains why today, at least 3, possibly more, design generations removed, the VHS-2 / Hellion still looks a little bit like a FAMAS. But if you look at the early prototypes, they definitely look like a FAMAS. So here they are kind of compared. Both stalks fully retracted. You can see that this is slightly longer than the M4, but not by much. And you have 6 foot more. That'd be something, wouldn't it? Hey, we don't edit around here. 6 foot more, 6 inches more of barrel. And of course, comparing to the F2000, we're a little bit longer too. But these actually had barrels quite a bit shorter. And it's a much bulkier gun. Although this 1.5 power optic was a very popular design concept in Europe at the time. It actually had been since the Steyr AUG. Of course, this uses a short stroke piston rotating bolt system. And the lever delay, well, they copied the French FAMAS, but it wasn't really shaking out. So there was kind of a concurrent prototype Bullpup also being tested, and it used the short stroke rotating bolt gas piston system. It's really impossible to say exactly which gun they copied this from, because ever since the AR-18, lots of guns have used it. So this was, what, their 4th design? You had the long stroke piston, lever delayed, and then you had the direct impingement, so it's internal piston, and now we're at the short stroke piston. So yeah, they're pretty much trying everything out. And in 2004, we kind of get the first of the FAMAS style prototypes, and then in 2005, while it's related to it, we get the earliest prototypes, or at least concept models, of what would eventually become this right here. Oops, I just realized as I went to flip these, this was actually already extended out from when I did it before. I'm not going to reshoot that scene, but you get the idea. It even drives home the point more how these adjust out.
Shorten that up just a little bit.
And really they adjust about the same. A little more in the Colt, which is ironic because it's 4 positions and this is actually 5. But close. This one's about 2 inches, about 2.5, 3. Anywho, I'm not trying to bore you with history. I'm trying to interest you, because this is what interests me. This is why I find this gun interesting. There's so much, and we still have 20 years to go till we get to this present day and time. That is cool. To me anyway. Then again, I'm weird. 2006, 2007 was the testing phase of what would soon be known as the VHS, which basically stood for multi-purpose, multi-role, Croatian machine gun or assault rifle if you prefer that. And it was finally showed off in 2007, including to Croatia's defense minister. And then in November of that year, 50 pre-production models were ordered for field trials and testings with the Croatian division serving with the Allies in Afghanistan. And these would be quickly delivered in 2008. And they would actually be fitted with Stanag magwells. Now, if you wondered why I had those green mags in the guns at the beginning, well, I'm about to explain why. And if you know, you know. 2008, yeah, they did test them, and they made a change to the magwell. And then finally in 2009, the Minister of Defense said that they basically passed trials and testing, including a 50,000 round endurance test. Kind of puts 5,000 rounds to shame, doesn't it? And then just a few days after making that announcement on May 15, the government would order 1,000 of the new VHS guns. They would order some D models with the nearly 20-inch barrel and some K models with the just over 16-inch barrel. It was 500 millimeters and 410 millimeters to be exact. So it makes a lot more sense in metric. And then soon 2,000 more would be added to the order. And the first photographic evidence of the VHS being in the hands of soldiers just out in the wild would come when they were seen in deployments and training and whatnot in 2011. Some were being used by guard units, intel units, including some being used by naval swimmers, divers, that kind of thing. So we start to see them getting out there by that time. And that was the initial version. And now let's talk about what is actually the biggest influencer of the VHS. It's not the AR, it's not the F2000, it's not the AK, it's not even the FAMAS. It's despite the opinion of some, probably many that have never even fired or handled one, HK's G36 was pretty successful. Nearly 36 nations would use it to some degree. Many more police departments, including several in the USA. And it would even be produced under license in a few countries, including Spain, Saudi Arabia, and so on and so forth. I'm not saying it's perfect, I'm just saying it was pretty successful in the late 90s, early 2000s. And part of it was its simplicity, modern construction method, and reasonably good cost. Also, modularity and configuration abilities. And in 2008, the Croatian army kind of took an evaluation when they were considering the VHS, and it was looking very likely to be their next gun. What magazine to have it take? Originally it was made with a Stanag magwell, but luckily it was also made with a very modular magwell. So when they looked at their inventory, they realized they had more G36 mags than they did AR-15 M4 mags. Now this isn't too odd. This mag was not just used by Germany, it was also used by Spain, of course, and several other nations either used it in their own guns or made their own versions. Here, for example, is the CZ805 Bren mag, which is basically interchangeable. They are different mags, but they're basically the same kind of polymer dimensions and rock and lock systems. So, Croatia decided to follow suit. They would use a G36 pattern magwell, and when they ran out of G36 mags to use, they would just make their own copy clones. And that's why I chose those green HK mags. Magpul. For rather obvious reasons, Springfield sells the Hellion with the AR-15 magwell. Selling it with the G36, at least as standard, would have been ridiculous. Although, sometimes I wish they would offer it just as a thing, because it is very modular. And they would still continue to offer the Stanag magwell for export. But for the military, yeah, they would go to the G36 style by 2009 in the original FAMAS-inspired VHS. And it did have a number of FAMAS elements, even if it was using short stroke gas piston and rotating bolt, more like a G36. It had a safety selector, very much from FAMAS style. And of all things, its muzzle end and grenade ring were very FAMAS style. And just kind of its overall Bullpup styling is FAMAS style. But other than that, it's really the G36 that influenced it. For example, the barrel. Like I said, this has about a 19.7, 19.8 inch barrel. The standard full-size G36 G36E barrel is 18.9. So quite similar. And while the original G36s in Bundeswehr service actually had an AK bayonet lug, the E models and later Bundeswehr ones would have more of a NATO style lug. And you see this carried over to the VHS here. Even the 4-prong flash hider resembles some that the G36K would have, although originally the VHS-1 had more of a bird cage. Again, it was kind of more FAMAS styling. The quick removable handguard on the G36 was carried over to the VHS. The carry handle and folding charging handle are very clearly inspired by, as is the modular magwell, amongst other things. Heck, originally the VHS had a 1.5 magnified scope in the carry handle, a la the G36E export model. But while the weight is essentially the same, or just about 8 pounds, depending on the configuration for the full-size rifle, the length isn't. With this collapsed in, we're under 32 inches. All the way out, we're still under 34. This is knocking on 40 inches. Now, of course, we do have the folding stock, and that does technically make the G36 more compact than the VHS, but it's not in a fire-ready configuration. Yes, you can fire it with the stock folded, but without the stock to brace your shoulder against, accuracy is not going to be great, and you're also making it much wider. Here you have a gun with a bullpup that's ready to go all the time, and you can quickly and easily adjust the length of pull to suit the user, although that was not an original feature of the VHS-1. Because right as they started to get these into the field, they realized that the internals were good. The short stroke piston and all that, they were working well. Of all things, the polymer they were made of was holding up fine. The cold hammer forged barrels are doing well. But the ergonomics, many of them inherited from the FAMAS, sucked. In particular, the fire mode selector was just terribly awkward to get to and adjust, especially on the fly. Also, the charging handle wasn't the easiest to grasp and get to, although that's not exactly something you can find on the FAMAS. And they really just found that it wasn't terribly modular. The handguard could come off, but the rest of the gun was just kind of fixed the way it was. It could only eject from the right side. It didn't have the adjustable stock at the time. It had a pretty unadjustable carry handle sight unit. Yeah, the ergonomics, the user interface left much to be desired. And HS Produkts knew this. By 2011, they were already working on a Generation 2, much as CZ went from the Bren 805 to the Bren 2. And by late 2012, they had the first prototypes, concept models, which they unveiled to the world as the VHS-2 in mid-2013. And finally, we're up to today's gun. First and foremost, the safety was changed, and I would argue it was again rather inspired by the HK safety. This new switch style. And it's not just on the right side now, of course. It's ambi on both. But whereas the G36 only ejected from the right side, although it did have a case shell deflector, the new VHS-2, they only had a left side ejection ability. You can actually change left to right ejection very easily in the field. Not as easily as Beretta's ARX 160, but it doesn't require changing parts out like, say, on a Israeli Tavor or Steyr AUG. So it's immensely more lefty friendly and even more righty friendly with thanks to the new safety. But they wouldn't just change those things. I like the charging system, this kind of G36 style. Full disclosure though, I love the G36, so that could just be part of it. Bolt release, fine. Yeah, the trigger, it's not as bad as 90s bullpup triggers, but compared to better options today, it is acceptable at the best of days. While this was the original G36 carry handle, they had long since switched to a metal, lower, longer Picatinny handle, and they would go to the same with the VHS-2 here. While the one had iron sights, this had improved iron sights. They also improved the ergonomics of the charging handle. One big improvement that the Hellion VHS-2 makes over the G36 with the charging handle, this reciprocates with the bolt carrier. It's directly part of this is the bolt carrier. This actually is non-reciprocating, but in case you do need to connect them to use them as a forward assist or silent closure device, there's a button. You can actually push it here and manually lock them together. It's also with the 2, we have the 5-position adjustable stock, which I find very interesting for a bullpup. We also have a removable cheek riser cheek piece to work with the new pick rail. And we have a new handguard. And it's compatible with the original VHS-1, but using kind of the modern standards, it's M-LOK compatible now. And they're expected to mount Picatinny rails or other devices, including an underbarrel grenade launcher. We have a 3-position gas regulator on the military gun. On the semi-auto civilian gun, we have a 2-position, but it is adjustable. I think it's interesting that it does use the same bayonet lug as the G36. And that's not necessarily a good thing, because this is not a Stenag lug. And this is something, if you're considering one of the 20-inch guns, you might want to realize. I'm not saying don't buy one because of it, but here I picked out my M9 just to show you on the G36. The lugs almost line up, but not quite. There's actually a German pattern bayonet housing that fits this, but not your standard M7, M9. And so I was curious with the Hellion 20-incher if that would be carried over or if Springfield would adjust it a bit. A bit to my amazement, they did not. It almost goes on. Almost. But the spec's not quite there. And I tried actually all of my bayonets, including a Taiwanese one, an Italian one for the 7090, a Swiss one, which is actually Italian too, even a Czech Brin bayonet. None of them fit. And that's the same for my G36. You actually do need the specific German style bayonet to go for this. And again, it almost goes on. If you squeeze these in, you can actually kind of fudge it on there, but it won't latch, it won't do right. And if you really force it, it'll get stuck and you have to kind of slam it off. I wanted to show you that though. So, it's not a Stenag lug. On the one hand, that's kind of disappointing because to get these bayonets for the Hellions, the VHS-2s, they're like $300. That's more than Misha pays for bayonets. On the other hand, I'm kind of glad they didn't change it. I mean, it is cool that this is the military spec barrel. And I do like that it has not only the grenade cutout, but it even has the ring, and it even has the fins on the barrel. I wasn't expecting them to do that. And it has the modern 4-prong flash hider. Like I said, the VHS-1 had a bird cage, but with the 2, one of the improvements, and they went to the prong. Of course, it's still on a 1/2 by 28 threads. With that, let's pull the handguard off and look at the barrel. I have an HK inspired push pin, but it is actually captive, unlike on a lot of HKs. Even though this gun is new unfired, I was able to push it out by hand, but it actually fits very tightly, which is a testament to quality construction. And you just kind of slide it forward and pull it off. Sorry, YouTube's a little unpredictable about anything they might consider disassembly or gunsmithing. So yeah, this pulls off. Your handguard's very light, modular. The pin stays in your receiver. The other side does have a dimple in it. In case it is stuck, you can use a bullet tip to push it out. Again, it's captive. So here's our barrel. A little bit of a step down there. There's our gas piston. You can actually see the piston and spring above it. If you want to remove it, this is your gas regulator. Comes out. Disassembly is actually quite straightforward. Now the barrels on these are not quick change, not like on a AUG, and not even like on a Tavor. Of course you can pull the barrel, but you need the right tools and whatnot. So that kind of presents the problem, because if it was quick change like an AUG, I'd just have one of each barrel length. But since it's not, that's why I'm having to decide 20-inch or 16. And speaking of the 16, let's bring it back up finally and compare its barrel profile under the handguard to the 20. Even after putting over 1,000 rounds through this, the handguard still fits very well. And barrel profile seems the same to me. If there's a difference, it's not by much. There's a little bit of a step down behind the gas block on both. You've got this ring here, going back here. It's a pretty thin profile. Not the thinnest I've ever seen, but pretty thin. Gas block here. Yeah, not really noting any differences. So yeah, really the difference is just up front, which is frankly how it should be. Not really noticing any design improvements between the early 22 version down here and the late 2023 version up here.
So me and Misha were actually just talking earlier about how robust the iron sights feel. They do feel very sturdy. Matter of fact, the whole gun feels very sturdy. I don't feel like it's a cheap, not a quality firearm whatsoever.
Yeah, now with over 1,000 rounds through it, it still is tight. Nothing's
very, very tight.
Loosey-goosey.
Well, speaking of tight, this trigger has more squeeze in it than orange juice. God, that was cheesy. But
stand in. Personally, dry firing the Hellion, comparing it to many other bullpups, I don't find the trigger bad. And this goes doubly so at the range. Typically when you're live firing a gun, you just don't pay attention to the trigger. And if you're picking up a bullpup, expecting a match grade trigger is optimistic. Here's my original one here. The trigger has a bit of a take up, but it's very smooth. It has stages, but smooth ones, and you have a wall. Very easy to predict. And it's fine. There's no crunch, not really many creep. It's very predictable. And again, when you're actually shooting, it's not a bad deal. Here's the brand new one. Never been fired by us. Feels about the same. Certainly no noticeable grit. And what minor resistance there could be that this one doesn't have. It could just be down to wear and tear, you know, breaking in. Now, as I pointed out a little bit, this one with the stock, when you push the button, it kind of springs itself out, and you push the spring back in. This one I noticed it doesn't do that. Like when you press it in, it's more like on an M4 stock. Set you down for just a sec somewhere. But it's easy to adjust, and it has a spring. It just seems stiffer. That could be a good or a bad. This one's nice if you want to very quickly deploy the stock, but it's one button. But if you're trying to actually set it to one of the middle positions, you have to kind of basically pull it all out and then push it back in. So it's more steps. This one, you could very easily set it. Of course, it could just be wear and tear. Again, once this one has a couple hundred rounds through it, this might loosen up too. Heck, even just disassembling it might do that. But I did notice that small difference. But nothing else is really jumping out at me. The tightness, the controls, they all feel the same. So I don't see any difference. I don't see any QC failures, decline, but I also don't see any like improvements. But maybe I'm wrong. If you've heard of anything, do let me know. And I did check. Both of them just have the standard 2-position adjustable gas, which is, I believe, supposed to be suppressor and normal. The military gun is normal, adverse, and grenade. The Hellion is assembled in the USA by Springfield using new provided to them by HS Product Croatian parts. Things like the barrel are US made, 1-in-7 twist, I believe they're chrome moly. But to the original diameter and specifications, it is what it is. And to be fair, the barrels have been fine. They've actually been quite accurate. Would I prefer a Croatian barrel? Yes. Yes, I would. But what can you do? At least the other parts, the bolt and carrier, are. And for the most part, these are straight military-style guns, or at least export-style, including having the Stanag magwell. While the Croatian military uses the G36 magwell, most export models have that. The one big area you can see the Hellion is different is the pistol. This is the one it originally comes with. This is the B&T I put on mine because it's as close as I could find to a VHS-2 grip. Because the original gun, this is all one piece. The grip is not interchangeable. For the US market though, they made it interchangeable and they take standard AR-15 M4 grips. Would I prefer the original? Yes. But do I understand why, for a mass market product, they went to a removable grip? Yes. It makes sense for the shooter. What I'm actually counting on is someone to 3D print or even just make and mold a replica VHS grip, because if you put one on and it lines up properly, it'll be almost indistinguishable. It's not a big deal, and again, it's rectifiable. But in the interim, I'll use this B&T grip. So, would I prefer the original style? But I do understand.
Yeah, and as far as the grip here, I do prefer a more standard AR grip, and that may be something we do in the future, is change some of these grips out and see if that makes a difference on where my hand position's at.
Easy to do.
For sure. I think that would be probably a real good thing to do.
The Hellion has pleasantly surprised me with just how reliable, dependable it's been. I like the ease of disassembly, ease of maintenance. I really don't mind the trigger for a Bullpup, although, well, Fox had a different opinion.
But the trigger is horrific. I'm sure in the video, when we actually go back and review the footage, you can probably see a few times where I don't even know if another round's coming out. There's so much travel. It was pretty easy to keep on target.
I like that it comes with iron sights. I know that's a low bar, but a lot of guns don't today. The adjustable stock is pretty interesting for a Bullpup. I really do like the recoil pattern. It doesn't have a lot of rise or even pushback. I find it very easy to not let it climb up on me. And I do like the fact that this is adjustable. I do think that's kind of a neat feature for any bull. And on the other end of it, the handguard gives you plenty of options, as does the common 1/2x28 threaded muzzle device, and even adjustable gas system. And we haven't really noticed it being magazine picky, anything like that. But it's not just that the semi-automatic Hellion is a surprise, but the original VHS and VHS-2 really are as well. Now Fox is going to try shooting at some paper.
Flip this one down. Let's go to setting 0. Here we go. Lock the target down. Pretty good.
That's an M-lock form. We could put a foregrip or a vertical angle grip on it to maybe change up how your forehand is going too.
Very true. And I think it'd be a good idea to put a forward grip out here on the front.
HX Products, IM Metal, came out of really nowhere. It was a new company, and within 10 years it had prototypes and had quite good success with the HS-2000/XD pistol, and within 15 years success with a Bullpup, a notoriously difficult gun to get right. And Croatia was part of Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia wasn't the largest nation on earth to begin with, and Croatia is the size of a medium U.S. state. In fact, its armed forces were under 15,000 active personnel with 25,000 reserve, at least up until recent times in the whole Ukraine war thing. So when I say it's surprising, it's a compliment that they managed to accomplish so much, and not just domestically, but even globally. They went from using, not manufacturing, just using Yugoslavian, rather former Yugoslavian, Zastava M70s, to designing and building these. And really the switch from VHS to VHS-2 wasn't because there was some major failure. The polymer wasn't wrong, the metallurgy wasn't wrong, it was an ergonomics thing. The bones, the inside of the gun was fine. But that's a big jump. Croatia went from the AK to this. Okay, with the VHS in between, but still, you get the idea. The initial VHS contracts are over by 2014, and they would have around 7,800, the original generation, in inventory by 2015. But that's the time when the 2 really came to be and was replacing orders. So from this point on, we start to see more and more VHS-2. The initial order that was placed was for 300. It's kind of a pilot batch, and from there an order for 20,000 was placed. And this would allow them to retire the M70 from frontline service. By 2018, no M70s were in frontline service. They had sold off, given away, or otherwise scrapped a majority of the nearly 90,000 they had, but they did retain about 40,000 for training and AK familiarization purposes for their troops, new recruits. And of those, about half were given away as aid to Ukraine last year. So there are some M70s in stockpiles in Croatia, but not many left, 10, 20,000 at most. Maybe a handful of others, but they're not in active service. As for the original VHS-1, we'll call it retroactively, they would serve for some time, but started to quickly be phased out. In fact, today, there are only 1,000, even fewer, in anything like frontline service. Even those are kind of just auxiliary backup guns. And they did have both versions, short and long. The ones that are kept around are for training. Many are just put in reserves, or some have been given away. There you have it. Speaking of giving away, this really was quite an export success for HS Products too. From the beginning, 2008, once the design was kind of out there, different countries expressed interest. Well, those original countries wouldn't end up taking the gun. One that would was Iraq. In 2014, they started to acquire the VHS-1, both versions. This would be for their security, border police, special forces. And then in 2015, they would actually sign a contract for VHS-2s. Again, both versions. And the Iraqis have been seen with both the G36 magwell and the Stanag magwell version. And they really run with it. The Iraqi police continue to use it. The ground forces, special forces. In 2018, Croatian media reported 30,000 were being sold to them, but some claim as many as 100,000 have been or will be sold to Iraq. So they really, took a shine to it. Interestingly, the U.S. Department of Defense purchased 500 VHS-1s in 2012, and then 250 VHS-2s in 2015, once that was in full-scale production. These are for testing, evaluating, and maybe giving away to friends and allies to see how they like them. Makes perfect sense, but still, 750 sold. That's about as many G36s as the entire country of Croatia had. Somewhat ironically, France nearly adopted the VHS. In fact, a special version known as VHS-F2 was created for them that took FAMAS magazines and had a few other changes to suit them, and it made it through the first couple of rounds of testing and trials. In fact, it was put on the short list, and France was planning on purchasing, whoever was going to win the contract would have an order for 100,000. So it actually got very far, and France would purchase a small number for testing, but as we know today, in the end, the HK416 won out. Still, considering the gun was inspired and even originally started off as almost a direct copy of the FAMAS, I think it's cool. But of course, the whole reason that HS designed and developed and produced this was to work with its own nation and government, and therefore it has been very successful. Both versions, VHS D2 and VHS K2, have been bought in large numbers. I was not able to find a breakdown. Interestingly though, according to soldiers and kind of other on-the-ground reports, while the longer barrel was intended for standard use and the shorter barrel for more special forces, in reality, it seems like the K version, the 16-inch version, the 410mm barrel version, is kind of become the de facto just standard, here's a gun for general purposes. Whereas the D model, the 500mm, is being used for more outdoor settings, say 600-800 meter shots when they're required, even is kind of a de facto DMR. But I wish I had numbers. Oh well. And of course, the standard pistol is the HS-2000. What we know today in the US is the Springfield XD. So those two are there in service. Roughly 25,000 VHS-2s are in the Croatian government service, military service today, with the majority being in the army, but not all. Some are also in service with the police. But because of recent aggressions in Eastern Europe, the defense minister has talked about creating another brigade, kind of a medium mechanized brigade, rapid response brigade, and it'll need guns and tanks for that matter, and vehicles. So there has been discussion of having a total of 50,000 of these in service at some point. This also shows us the production capacity of HS Products today. So they seem to have grown and done very well for themselves. We'll just have to see where the future goes, but this seems to be a ringing success. And now for my decision. Which one's a keeper and which one goes on the market?
clear, and bolt release.
Right before this video, he asked me what's the conversion for yards to meters. I'm like, I'm not talking Alexa. Pros and cons. Well, pros for the 16-inch. We've shot it. It runs. I know it runs. It works well. And if you're going to do a bullpup, being short is nice. Being as light as possible is nice. And I don't find the look bad. It's a very stubby little barrel. It looks like it should be an SBR because of the handguard, but it's not. Pros to the 20-inch. Honestly, that's pretty obvious. Bayonet lug, grenade ring, and I also do like these fins on the barrel. It's an aesthetic thing. Also though, yeah, going from 16 inches to near 20 for 5.56 isn't bad. The bullet performs very well, 18 to 20 inches, so should expect a little bit better accuracy. Not by me, but by others. Also, while the 16-inch gun is very soft shooting, that little bit extra weight at the end of the barrel should make it even softer. The cons. Well, it's obviously a longer gun. And it's obviously heavier. But I'm going to be honest, it's not as much heavier than I expected from the carbine to the rifle. It's not very noticeable at all. Also, a con, this is a new gun. It's unproven. I'm assuming it'll run as well as the carbine. But the only way to really know that for sure is to run it for a year and a half as I've done with the carbine. That's time, that's effort. So what about cons to the carbine? Honestly, I'm hard pressed to think of any. It runs. I guess one might say, since it's a very early production one, if there were any issues with it, they would presumably be fixed with this one. But I really don't know of any. Yeah, I'm having a hard time. When it comes to military service, they're both in there. And if anything, the carbine is probably what you'll see in the hands of a Croatian, or for that matter, even Iraqi soldier more often. But these are out there as well. So, does the rifle get the sling? Or does the carbine get to keep it? Right now, neither. Sling comes off. I am going to provisionally take the rifle, but only after 1 or 2 range trips. If this runs fine with all types of ammo, mags, then it'll be a keeper. And I'll put this on the market or use it as trade fodder. I've talked about my reasons, my pros and cons. But the reason I'm making this decision this time is because last time it faced me, I kind of went the opposite direction. So kind of mixing things up. Earlier this year, I had to decide CZ Bren 2, 11-inch or 14. And that time I picked the carbine. Again, both are used by the military, A1 and A2. But I felt that the 14 was noticeably heavier than the 11. Even though it had a bayonet lug, which I thought was super neat. I like the look of this better and more. So this time, I'm making the opposite decision. Again, provisionally selling the shorty, keeping the long one. As we end with both of these on the table, I actually find the design history eerily similar. The 805 Bren 1 and the VHS-1 both went into testing in 2008. Both were selected for service in 2009. Both started to kind of appear in the field in 2011. The VHS-2 really kind of got out in the wild a little before the Bren 2, but really both are making a name for themselves in 2015. So the VHS-2 was just a little bit ahead of the Bren 2. But in both cases, the second generation wasn't because the first generation was flawed internally, but for ergonomic handling reasons, that kind of thing. So they really do parallel each other. But whereas Croatia went with a Bullpup, the Czech Republic went with a very conventional layout, very Scar-esque. But both are very quality European guns, and it's interesting to see these Eastern European countries keeping their firearms production going, as well as their firearms design and development, while at the same time a lot of Western European nations like France and the UK haven't. I wonder if there's a lesson there or a reason. But that does go back to the history of it. I like that. I kind of like the plucky underdog story of both of these guns and several others. Plus, they're both just really damn fun to shoot. So, what do I think of the 20-inch Hellion? It's pretty damn cool. What do you think, though? Which version do you like? Let's discuss. As always, if you could, please like, share, and subscribe. If you'd like to help support the channel, you know the deal, Patreon. And now we're also doing live streams. And if you'd like to see the full couple of review videos we did, you can check out the history, the backlog of this channel. I just put the little kind of cut up pieces in here to keep the video more entertaining. And just to show, us in front of the camera. And we will, as quick as possible, get this out to the range. And I'm sure there'll be a much shorter, just range video. Hopefully an uneventful one. But the way our luck goes, it'll probably be a travesty. Which is exactly why I'm not selling the 16-inch Hellion just yet. This is Misha. And on behalf of Jero and Fox and the others, catch you very soon next time.